Hello! Greetings to you in the name of Yahweh. Gotta catch my breath for a minute. There we go. Tonight we're going to talk a little about the three last heads of Revelation 17. That will be the sixth head, seventh head, and yes, there's also an eighth head with a riddle to go along with it. And I want to share the answer to that riddle. If I don't know if my answer is right or not, but I think it is. First, let's go to the text. Read that text again. I hope you're beginning to see how some of these are fitting into history, because the whole book will fit into history with the exception. Well, again, I'll say it. There are three levels to the revelation. There's the heaven level, the atmosphere level, and the earth level. We can only understand the things that are heavenly through our own earthly minds because, well, most of us haven't been there and back yet. We don't understand how that works. We don't even know if we would see something in the heavenly realm, how we would be interpreted by our eyes or brain. What would we actually see? Would we see dragons and beasts and all this? Well, maybe so. I just don't know. But what I do know is that we couldn't interpret it properly. All we could do was the best we could do with an interpretation. Perhaps you've read near-death experiences, people who have seemed to be in those kind of realms. They come back with stories that almost seem unbelievable because they're so fairy tale-like. Like when you're in that condition, evidently you can see through things and you can see way far away and close up with 360 degrees seeing. Inside, outside, you can even see into yourself when there's something to see. And you see people you think are Yeshua, and you see somebody you think is Elohim, and all kinds of dead relatives and everybody else. That would be a wonderful thing. In fact, there's a lot of biblical information that is very much like what they're seeing in NDEs today. That's the closest thing I can think of, and certainly I noticed there are several what I would call NDEs in the Bible. Look at this. I got a brown eye and a blue eye. No wonder I'm in such a fit today, just having finished my taxes. Anyway, let's go back to the text. If you got something to say, just please break in. No reason not to. I'm dry as usual. I'm so nervous. Then one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls came and said to me, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the great prostitute, who is seated on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed sexual immorality. And with the wine of whose sexual immorality the dwellers on earth have become drunk." This is the ESV. I think that's a pretty good translation of porneia, sexual immorality, especially the part immorality. That works pretty good, rather than fornication. Nobody really knows what that means anyway. This is what it means, sexual immorality. There's sexual morality too, as well. So when we have looked into the lives of the kings of the earth, don't we find sexual immorality? Absolutely. They are above the law. They are above any statute even written in the sky. they are above, especially these guys that we're talking about here, these heads of the beast that pop up from time to time. And he carried me away in the spirit. Should be not a capital S. That's not the Holy Spirit they're talking about there. They're talking about a spiritual realm. Carried him away in the spirit into a wilderness. I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was full of blasphemous names, and it had 7 heads and 10 horns. Of course, we're talking about the heads tonight. We've already discussed 6 of those heads, or 5 of those heads, actually. This woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet and adorned with gold and jewels and pearls, holding in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the impurities of her sexual immorality. And on her forehead was written a name of mystery, Babylon the Great, or Mystery Babylon, or Babylon, a mystery, mysterium. That means something secret, or it also means perhaps a type of religion in that day, which the religions were called mysteries. Mystery Babylon, that's a religion. Mother of prostitutes and of earth's abominations. I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints, the blood of the martyrs of Yeshua. That explains a lot of what we've already been talking about. And we looked at the woman last time. When I saw her, I marveled greatly. But the angel said to me, why do you marvel? I was thinking today, do you think this angel that is touring John around is Messiah? Maybe in disguise? I was wondering that today because a few more things would make sense if it were. That he's playing several parts in this. He's playing a part in the spiritual realm, in the sky or heaven realm, and in the earth realm as well. That is Messiah. The beast that you saw was and is not and is about to rise from the bottomless pit and go to destruction. That's a mystery in itself. That may well be the explanation of the mystery Babylon. About to rise from the pit, go to destruction, because this beast was and is not and is about to rise. That sounds like exactly the opposite of the description of the Father, does it not? Or the description of Yeshua is, was, is to come, the mystery of faith. It actually says this in the liturgy. Let us recite the mystery of the faith. Christ has died. Christ is risen. Christ will come again. If you've ever sat through a service in an Episcopal or Methodist church, you'll hear the mystery of faith. It speaks of it. So we have a mystery too. And the dwellers on earth whose names have not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world will marvel to see the beast, because it was and is not and is to come. This calls for a mind of wisdom. Do you have one? Do you want one? The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman is seated. Hey, that's not so hard. Well, as you know, there are 2 cities at that time that were famous, and they both sat on 7 hills, and one was Jerusalem and the other was Rome. But they are also 7 kings. Actually, the word behind that is basileoi, which means rulers, not necessarily kings, a ruler of any kind, a potentate, somebody way up there, like a grand poobah. Why have these kings have fallen? One is, the other has yet to come. And when he does come, he must remain only a little while. It's not to come. It's a sixth head and a seventh head. This is a very important thing. Note. When he does come, he must remain only a little while. Keep that in mind. Because 5 have fallen, 1's not come. And when he does come, he must remain only a little while. I figure that is the 7th head. I could be wrong. As the beast that was and is not, it is an 8th, but it belongs to the 7 or 7th. And it goes with the rest to perdition or destruction. There's the 8th head. But it says up there there's 7 heads, but somebody's adding one here. They are to receive authority, royal power, as rulers, basileoi, for 1 hour, short time, together with the beast, which is wrong. These are of one mind, and they hand over their power and authority to the beast. They will make war on the Lamb, and the Lamb will conquer them. Now, that might be a prophecy for later on. But immediately after Jerusalem was destroyed, which is part of this whole scheme here, the Lamb began to be the conqueror. And finally, the Roman Empire was supposedly a Christian empire, whether you want to consider it that or not. If you read those guys, some of the fathers of the faith, mothers of the faith, if you can find any, times immediately after Jerusalem went down, you'll see that they were very, very primitive in their faith. They kept the Shabbat. They understood the apostolic constitutions of the assembly, and to read them is often a joy. The farther and farther you get, you start seeing apostasy coming in. He is Master of masters and King of kings, and those with him were called and chosen and faithful. By the way, we've got a 666, of course, here. A couple of times ago, we went through and made our decision, at least I did, what 666 stands for, what it looks like in its original. But did you know there's a 777 too? If you do the same thing with the words King of Kings and Lord of Lords in the original languages, you get 777. Did you know that? That's really cool. Revelation has a 666, Kaiseros Neros, or Neron, and you also have King of Kings, Lord of Lords, Ruler of Rulers, or Sovereign of Sovereigns, and Master of Masters. At least that's why I have it in my translation. And the messenger, the angel, said to me, the waters that you saw where the prostitute is seated are peoples and multitudes and nations and languages. Most of the time in scriptural prophecy, especially in the Tanakh, you see that the seas, waters, great waters designate people groups. Peoples spread out all over the place. So sometimes when you read about the seas in our 12 prophets, then you're going to be reading about people groups. In other words, a person comes out of the people into an esteemed place to rule. It's the same way with preachers. They have to come out of the congregation, walk up to the bema, and speak from there. They don't fly down from heaven. They should have been up to the throne room. They should have gotten down by the time the service starts, and they actually have to walk in to the assembly building, walk up the aisle, walk up the steps, past those old prayer altars up to the podium, and walk through the crowd and speak. They come up from the sea as well. They will make her desolate and naked and devour her flesh and burn her up with fire. Huh, that's funny. Wasn't this talking about a great city? This woman being a great city. And we talked about to some extent that Nero, one of these heads, burned Rome down, burned it to the ground because the place stunk so bad, he said, and he had a better city to put on top of that. So, when he got the city burned up and they begin to come after him, calling him the incendiary, Nero the incendiary, that is a person that sets fires or arsonists, then he blamed it on a special group that he loved so much in Rome, and that was Christians. He blamed the fire of Rome on Christians. Do you recall that? I don't know if you got to see Quo Vadis or not, but again, I'm going to say try to see that, because you're going to see how the people turned on the Christians and how the leaders turned on them and how they were brought into the arena. This is before there was a Colosseum, brought into the arena with wild beasts and crucified in there. And all the people in the arenas cheered and laughed while the people in the arena were being eaten up and destroyed. In fact, there are stories about some who were not baptized that were in that arena, and knowing that this was their last chance, they baptized themselves in blood. Yeah, take a look sometime at the story of Paul and Thecla. That's one such. In fact, in that story, Paul and Thecla are running away from her husband, and they run into a lion that's come after them. Well, Paul's got such a great tongue, Paul's able to convince the lion to get saved. And it's that very lion, when they both get put into the arena, that comes out to devour them. And of course, remembering them, that lion guards them instead of eats them. What a story, Paul and Thecla. All right. For Elohim has put it into their hearts to carry out his purpose by being of one mind and handing over the royal power to the beast until the words of Elohim are fulfilled. Don't you remember the general Vespasian, who with his son Titus were sent by Nero into Israel, and that 7-year war culminating in a defeat called Masada. But before that, the entirety of Jerusalem was breached with over 1.5 million people inside those walls. And there were more inside the walls that were dead from starvation inside, because the Romans cut them off completely. What was he going to say? It is said that the Romans set the temple on fire and burned the whole city down, just like Yeshua prophesied, there won't be one stone left upon the other. Some say, though, that the zealots burned it down inside the temple. We know that they burned the food supply, and that's why people were dying. They had enough food in there to last a decade. But the rulers set the food on fire, grain, because they wanted to make the people on their side. And they finally did, the people inside Jerusalem on their side. So they burned their food supply. I think Elohim willed both of these things. throughout the minor prophets in the Old Testament, don't we see time after time Elohim promising to bring destruction and fire upon Jerusalem and Israel? Oh, yes, we do. Dark days. And also Rome, and they both burn almost at the same time. One burns, then the other burns. Now look, the woman that you saw is the great city that has dominion over the kings of the earth. If you like to look that up in commentaries, you'll often find that, what do you call them, a commentarist? You'll see the commentarists say, well, this seems an awful lot like the city of Rome. And remember, the goddess of the city of Rome's name was Amor, A-M-O-R, Amor. If you've had any European languages in your life, you know that means love, probably of the erotic kind. The goddess Amor, the city Rome, yet the commentarist will say, but this also sounds like another city, a great city, that being Jerusalem. No army wanted to go up against that place. It was so greatly fortified. The walls were so high and so thick, and there were so many walls. How was anybody ever supposed to breach walls like that in battle? Yet Rome and General Titus, son of Vespasian, was able to do that through some trickery and with the help of Flavius Josephus. So there's the text again. Is anybody still here? Let's see who's here. Oh, a wonderful group. Hallelujah. Let's see if I can find my notes now. Excuse me. I'm looking at the first few heads, and we talked a lot about the fourth head, Claudius, and his first wife, Messalina. You remember her, what her hobby was and what happened to her. She's even on Roman coins. Wow. Head number 5, a lot of your commentators will say the fifth head is Nero, or the sixth head is Nero. But the way I read it, the fifth head is Nero, and there's a good reason as when we go on to the rest as well. Let's see what I have to say tonight about him. Oh, in 1716, the 10 horns that you saw, which are, of course, the main 10 legions of Rome. They had more or less than 10 legions. 10th legion, Fretensis. They and the beast will hate the harlot. They will make her desolate and naked and devour her flesh and burn her up with fire. And sure enough, and indeed, Nero did that very thing. He burned it up with fire as we spoke. Let's see. I spoke about Nero through Tacitus last time. Just checking here. Nero started a worldwide Christian persecution, as you know, and also a persecution of the Jews as having started the fire at Rome that killed lots of people and destroyed, flattened a third of the city. Nero had no money to pay it back, but he forced the Romans who had money to pay to return Rome to itself again, but it took them a long time to do that. In the meantime, they put the people who had been dispossessed out into open fields, allowed them to make camps there, and they even lit those open fields up for them at night with the bodies of Christians. They put a burlap sack over the Christian, hung him up on a pole, poured, what would it be that time? Some type of petroleum or oil on top of the sack and lit him up. And not a few. In fact, we see a couple of those guys burning up in Quo Vadis. It was just a hideous thing. I can't imagine that somebody was so cruel, but I don't think the fifth head, Nero, had to do these things himself. What he liked to do was go out into the streets at night and mug people or rape people, both men and women. Nero married a boy named Sporus. He married a gladiator, nearly 7 feet tall as well. And I can't remember his name, but it was a little longer than Sporus. He married his betrothed, Octavia, and he had her executed for adultery. Get out of here. Not you, not you. I told you this place has been infested, and I'm still seeing it come on out here and again. Then Nero married Poppaea, whose father was well known in the city of Pompeii in Italy. You might remember that Mount Vesuvius blew up in 79 AD, 10 more years, and in Pompeii, Mr. Poppaea owned a bunch of bars, and inside of those bars, like drinking bars, sex clubs, I guess you'd call them, because as they cleaned out Pompeii of the ash and restored the town, when they went inside those bars, there are still very big, very well painted pornographic pictures in all those bars. So they figured Poppaea, who was the queen at the time of Nero, Nero's wife, very beautiful woman, had come from a family that was used to the pornographic lifestyle, or pornographic lifestyle, I think, immoral lifestyle. And she came, it's one of the reasons Nero married her. Very well known and very well skilled in certain areas. But let's see, that makes 4 people. Nero married a boy, a large man, 2 women before his life was ended. And might I say that he killed all 4 of them and his mother. That's how wonderful he was. Plus, he was an incendiary. And it was given unto him to make war with the saints, the same one. Psalm 13:7, Revelation 13:7, and overcome them. And power was given him over all kindreds and tongues and nations. He owned the whole world. And all that dwell upon the land shall worship him. Those whose names were not written in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. If any person has an ear, let him hear. I talked about the end of Nero, or was it the end? Remember Epaphroditus helped Nero to put himself out of his misery, but soon after that, 3 Neros popped up. One from the east, one from the north, one from the west, with armies to invade Italy and Rome again and take back Nero's seat. Fake Neros. Or were they fake? Was the devil able to bring him back? Do you remember that one of the heads was wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed. And all the world wondered after the beast, for as to the wound being healed and all marveling, I guess we can explain that later. All we know is he who was supposed to be dead and whose remains were supposedly burned, he popped up in Greece, he popped up in Helvetia, he popped up in Egypt, and here he came toward Italy to take Rome back for himself. And this brings us to the sixth head. Now, following Nero, let me try this again. There was the year of three emperors. If they were emperors, and I'm not so sure they were. John is on Patmos. I don't know where he gets the news here, but in very fast succession, when Nero disappears, we find that the Spanish contingency of the Roman army was on the way to Rome to take over the government. And that was Galba, G-A-L-B-A. Galba was 70-some years old already with his army, and he was able to come in and take over Rome without a battle. But he told the Praetorian Guard in Rome, the guard of the emperor, that he would pay them such and such monies if they would see to be preserve Rome until he got there. And so when he got there, he refused to pay them. I guess he put them off for about 6 months. And then he downright refused to pay them. So they just killed him. And then another army came, this time from Lusitania. That is, I think that's Portugal, Lusitania. And that was a friend of Nero who had been married to Poppaea before Nero was. This is all so entwined. And here he comes, his name being Otho or Otto, O-T-H-O. And so he gets to Rome and gets in the throne of the emperor. Whether he's sworn in, I don't know, but this is a guy that was like Nero in many ways, many ways. As one person described him, omnivorous, if you understand what that means. Otto ended up, after about 6 months or less, killed himself. He couldn't handle it anymore. And not only that, but there was another army coming down from Germania, from Germany. That's the one, I can't remember his name, but this general there was a glutton. He was put into a place of general there in Germany as a prize for something he did for an emperor. And so he wants to be, what is his name? I looked it up in between sessions here, and I still can't remember. Okay, well, maybe I will. You don't care anyway, probably. Where was I? So he got down there, and what he did when he got to Rome, this guy was a high liver and a glutton and very foul and a horrible person. And he set his troops, bring these troops into Rome, and he told them, have fun, do whatever you want. And of course, these troops, first of all, were foreigners, mostly. Mostly, they were Germaniacs, and they had never seen a huge town like this, a city, and all adorned with such beautiful things, and beautiful people, and educated people. And these, what's his name? He let them loose upon these people in Rome. They murdered, raped, robbed, set fires, all kinds of stuff. So then the Senate makes a proclamation. And who's to be the new emperor? They call Vespasian, who's down in Israel, in Palestine. They call him to come up and take over it. Now remember, Vespasian was a mule trader. And because he had fallen asleep during one of Nero's singing concerts, Nero fired him from his generalship, and he went back to mule trading in Britain. But Vespasian was one of the ones that cleaned up Britain for Claudius, so he knew Britain quite well. Vespasian had a little bit of a word on this ahead of time, that he would become the king of the world. Now, where did he get that word? From Josephus. When Josephus was captured as one of the main general of Galilee, he was going to be crucified immediately, because when he was fighting the Romans from a city in Israel called Jotapata, he shot an arrow out that hit Vespasian in the ankle. So if I'm getting this right, I'm doing this off the top of my head, I'm afraid. He actually shot Vespasian, and Vespasian kept him when he was captured from being crucified, because Josephus recited to Vespasian the star prophecy. You know, the one about Balaam, from Balaam, about the star that would rise and be the head of the whole earth. Josephus said, Vespasian, that is you. And if you don't believe me, keep me alive until it happens. So Vespasian put Josephus in chains, and instead of having him crucified. But when the call came down from Rome that Vespasian was to bring his troops up there and overcome the bad guy that was in there, he let Josephus go, gave him the ring of a son to put on his finger, gave him a place in the Roman palace to live, gave him riches, made him famous. And that's why we know of Josephus today, and why he took the name Flavius, because that was Vespasian's name. Titus, Flavius, Sabinus, Vespasianus, who was number 6. Vespasian came in 69 to actually be the 4th emperor in a row very quickly. So he was known as the founder of the Flavian dynasty because his 2 sons reigned after him. They consolidated Roman rule in Germany and Britain and reformed the army and brought prosperity to the empire. Began the construction of the Colosseum. Now, where do you think they got the money and the materials to build this Colosseum in Rome that everybody can still see part of today? That was built with the treasure from the Jerusalem temple that was taken at the time of the invasion. And let me see if I can find the Titus arch here and let you see an arch in particular in Rome that's still there today, commemorating the captivity of Judea. No, you've seen it before. I wish I had more time to do this stuff, and then I would give you more pictures. But, you know, I'm old school. What can I say? See if I can find a picture. Yes, of course. Here's the Arch of Titus. You've seen pictures of it before, certainly. Let's see what else we have here. Anything? A little bit. Right here this is the main feature. Here we have Jewish captives, made slaves. We might say to those captive, let them go into captivity. Here is the menorah. This is really the only place you can actually see what the menorah looked like. Wow, look how big that is. The golden menorah, along with other, wow, that was all gold. Can you imagine the size of that? And it won't let me go sideways, but there's still, after 2,000 years, there's quite a lot of detail. Of course, this guy's head's moved over a little bit. But they brought all this loot back, and perhaps as many as 2 million slaves. Incredible. Ouch. All right. Vespasian, let's go back to him. He did the first 3.5 years of the siege of Israel. Sent by Nero to quell the Jewish revolt. He was retired already, as I mentioned, he was breeding burros and donkeys. So back he's sent to Israel, and he gets his oldest son, who's about 22, 23 years old, brings him on as a general as well. Vespasian and Titus came in like the second beast of Revelation 15 in the Pincher movement into northern Israel and Galilee. And they came in, they shock and awed, absolutely shock and awe, killed everybody they could find. If the person was worthy to be a slave, made a slave of them. There's so many slaves after this that they couldn't even sell a slave anymore. Everybody had plenty of slaves. And so many of the Jewish slaves went out into the world all over the place. And that's probably how they actually got to Europe. I mean, in a modern sense, we know that there was dispersion, but that was like 800 years before. This was a dispersion every bit as bad as that, if not worse. I don't know why we miss that as well, that there's a dispersion 70 AD to 80 AD that really made the dispersion of Nebuchadnezzar look pretty small. There are 7 kings, 5 of whom have fallen. One, head number 6, is ruling when John's having his vision. That's the way I see it. The dates of the Revelation, not the 90s, as consensus scholars say, although there is something in the Revelation that points to the 90s, but the 70s. And some scholars who really know this stuff, especially preterist scholars, say that the Revelation was written more like in 66. Nero was still the emperor in 66. He supposedly killed himself in 68. But here's what I think. You know, the Revelation, first of all, is not in chronological order. And what it's not a flowing story at all. It has been put together in sections. Like, well, just as a note, chapter 10 is the Colossus, the giant Colossus standing 1 foot in the sea, 1 foot on the land. That's what that's about. Chapter 11, I can't remember what it is right now, but chapter 12 is about the woman in the sun. And someday maybe we'll get to those if we get that far in this study. It's not in chronological order. What I think is happening here is that John is getting visions, not all at one time, not all in one great big vision. I think he's getting a series of visions or dreams, or maybe he's just writing this as a prophet himself. And when one is finished up, it's put at the end of his masterpiece. Follow me? That makes sense to me. But if we try to read it in chronological order, it does not work out. Like you've got 7 trumpets, 7 bowls, 7, what's the other one? Bowls, trumpets. What's the next one? I don't know why I'm not thinking of it right now. Probably because my brain's dried up.
Vials.
What are they?
Vials.
Vials. Is vials and bowls the same thing? I guess not. So with the first 3.5 years, we got Vespasian. But when he is called back to Rome to become the emperor, he sends the governor of Syria, said, I'm not going back there, he says, because they've got something in a plan for me. Mucianus, that was the name of the Syrian governor. You take an army back there and you go back and captivate Rome. And then when you get it settled down, I'll come and take it over. And Mucianus said, yes, okay, we'll do that. He was always looking for a big chance. And here Mucianus did that. And Vespasian went over to Alexandria to preserve his life so he would get out of the war until he could go up to Rome. He leaves his young son, Titus, at the very gates of Jerusalem to bring down the city. He's head number 7. And what does it say about head 7? Flavius, Titus, Vespasianus, Augustus. Full name, according to Revelation 17:10, he was to remain a little while. When Vespasian was called back to Rome in the middle of the siege, Titus took his place and eventually, as you know, conquered Jerusalem. Note also that Titus' mistress is a biblical figure, a New Testament figure. Her name is Bernice, the sister of King Herod Agrippa II. Bernice, you might read that, Bernice, Acts 25. Interesting enough that Acts 25 has another biblical hero in there talking to Bernice and her brother, that is Paul. Paul standing before people that were in his family. They know him. Agrippa knew him. In fact, in Josephus tells us that Paul was working for Agrippa, that King Agrippa sent him on travels as a messenger, and that Rome used Paul as a messenger too. One time, Paul was sent to Nero, who was doing a concert tour in Greece, to tell the story of how Rome had lost the first battle of the Jewish war. This is getting a little tight here. Talk about 5 or 6, I don't know what it's called, but you know, when 5 or 6 people are somehow related. I can't remember what you call it, sorry. Bernice is another type for the whore of Babylon. She is one of the last descendants of the Maccabees. She was a Maccabean princess, and we're talking about nearing the end of the first century. Titus's interpreter was Josephus, the historian. So everything's coming together here. So we have a complete history of the death of James the Just and the fall of Jerusalem from his hand. What does it say? He's only to remain a little while. He's the seventh head. Titus and his father Vespasian, when they went to Israel, they left the little guy behind, the second son of Vespasian. They left him behind. His name was Domitian. They left him behind. He was always jealous of his brother Titus. He hated him, probably because Titus was so well known and loved. When Vespasian and Titus got back to Rome, they had a triumph, a big parade. The younger son didn't get to sit in the chariot with them. That was one of the biggest blows of his life. But the youngest son was able to do one thing in Rome, being back. He was able to escape being killed by the emperor would-bes by dressing as a priest. Of course, with veils over his face so he could not be recognized. He was there staying with his father's brother, who was the chief of police in Rome, and his brother, Vespasian's brother, Sabinus there. Sabinus, Flavianus. Sabinus promised to keep the boy from being killed by the other would-be emperors that were coming in. And it was a close call because they were dining one night, Domitian and Sabinus, and in the door came this third so-called emperor that I can't remember his name right now. I'm going to get it because it's driving me crazy. That shows you, when you get up in age a little bit, you started getting a little bit senile. You can't remember this stuff. Vitellius. His name is something like, well, it means full of life from Latin, but I would remember it because it's similar to what my father used to put in his hair back in the 50s. Vitalis. You remember that? I suppose some of your parents put that in. It was an odd thing when I was in high school to see people wearing Vitalis. Okay, Vitellius, Galba, Otho, Vitellius, then Vespasian. And that's the end, by the way, of the Julio-Claudian dynasty, which began with Julius Caesar, ended with Nero. Vitellius. Well, Titus was a good emperor. His father had ruled for 10 years, brought Rome back together, and he died. He was getting up there in age. He was probably in his 60s when he was down leading the armies in Israel. Titus takes over, and what happens to Titus immediately is that Vesuvius happens, 79 AD. So Titus rules from 79 to 81. He is the seventh head, who is to remain a little while, just 2 years. It is said that Titus got a bad cold and flu, and that his brother told him there's a new treatment for this. Domitian said there's a new treatment for this. That is, you get a box of ice from the Alps, and you spend intervals inside in that cold atmosphere. So they did it. This is a rumor, but one of the authors says that this is how Titus died. He got in a chest full of ice, and then Domitian had it all set up to lock him in there. And after short order, Titus was dead. Domitian followed him and was emperor from 81 to 96. Most commentaries from Christians that you'll read say that John was in Patmos during the reign of Domitian. But that is not the case. You have to go back 20 years. John couldn't be 96 years old working on Patmos in a copper mine. That's ridiculous. And I show pictures on their Sunday school books of old John sitting in a cave, writing something down. Not possible. There was a lifespan of only about 35 years at that time, maybe a little more. John, I figure, because I figure he was in his 50s, and here's why. If you go back to the story of Bethabara, John the Baptist baptizing. And there, I believe this is in John, the end of 1, the Gospel of John, that is. In those days, a child that was in a village, for instance, or a city like Capernaum, would get an education if he was allowed to go into the synagogue in the town. He could get an education to read Aramaic and perhaps a little bit of Hebrew and Greek. If you were, remember this term, a mamzer, M-A-M-Z-E-R, you were not allowed to go into a synagogue school because a mamzer was a person that was thought to have been born out of wedlock. Yeshua was a mamzer. That's why we don't hear much about him. In fact, later on in the Gospel of John, when he's talking with the scribes about their father, they intimate to him that at least we knew our father. That's a means of saying you don't have any. You know, you're a mamzer. You're a bastard. That's what the word means. And had he been thought that way when he was a child, he would not get into a synagogue. In fact, he comes to the synagogue in Nazareth. They don't know him. And at the end, they say, who is this? Where did he get all this? Isn't this the son of Mary? Joseph isn't even mentioned there, or any father. And then they try to throw him off a cliff someplace. That's a mamzer. No education for you. But if you weren't and you became 17 and you came from a family that was actually in some kind of business, you were allowed to leave your hometown and go seek out higher education. You with me? So we see they're in Bethabara with John the Baptist baptizing, and we have Yeshua there looking for students, and we have a whole passel of people around looking for a teacher. These guys were undoubtedly 17 or 18. Their parents, or they had saved up the money for them to go and take this trip. They had shown during their young lives the acumen to maybe go on and become scholars or learn reading and writing more thoroughly. And so they're here looking for a teacher of higher education. And they choose that teacher. Of course, they wanted John the Baptist, who's there. He's a big showman. He's the one that was famous. He's even spoken of by Josephus and other histories of that time. But then Yeshua is there, and he picks his own students. And he had achieved some fame right there, as they could stand and watch the baptizer, I call him the dunker, dunking Yeshua. Perhaps they saw the manifestation of that or heard a voice. Certainly, if the scripture says some manifestation happened, it did. This is my beloved son. This day I have begotten thee, is the Ebionite understanding of what happened there. They would readily go with him if he chose them. So, all right, Yeshua, when's he born? Oh boy, there's estimates going clear back to 10 BC with good reason. The latest one here is the finding of a new solar eclipse in 1 BC, knowing that there is no year zero. It goes from 1 BC to 1 AD. Most of the scholars, Bible scholars that I know of, think it's 4 BC. So how old is he? And how old are these other fellows? So if he's crucified at 33, let's say he's born 1 BC, and say he's 30 years old. These other guys would be 30, they'd be about 10, 13, 14 years younger than him. Not the old man Peter with the long beard. That guy shown in Quo Vadis that played Peter could hardly even get into a boat, much less be a fisherman. He's just too fat. These are young, steady guys, strong guys, smart guys. And so he gets them when they're about 17. So if they're 17 in, say, 30, even 31, they were together for 3 years, so 30 AD, what would they be in 65? How old would they be? They're born about 10 AD or 15 AD. And to 55, that's 40 years old. This book wasn't written in the time of Vespasian when John is 90 or 115 or something like that. He's only 55 or maybe 60, more or less. He's still in the vitality of manhood. That's important to know. John is receiving a series of visions, not as a senile old man, but as a man in the fullest flower of maturity. Oh, I want to get through this little bit here, so I'm sorry, but I'm usually taking all this time. So why do Christians think that this happened during Domitian's time? Again, ruled from 81 to 96. He was the Emperor of Rome, the son of Vespasian, who succeeded his brother Titus. instigating a reign of terror. And he was assassinated as a tyrant. Let me show you a couple of pictures of these guys together in a happier time. Hold on just a second. This is so important. Documents, preterist. Let's see if I can, there they are. Oh, you're gonna love this. Here they are. Get out of there. You like? Here's the old man. Here's Titus. Here's Domitian. Boy, those are really realistic faces. Don't let them fool you. These guys were bloodthirsty in the land of Israel. And this guy, I guess because he didn't get to kill anyone in Israel, he tried to kill everyone else, and especially believers. I think I told you before, I believe that he had Josephus murdered because he broke the law, being a part. I believe that Josephus was converted. He was a secret believer. Clement from the Nazarene Acts, Clement of Rome, who was his cousin, had him executed for being a purveyor of a foreign superstition, which is being a believer. Now, Domitian met a bad end. His servant, who, funny enough, his name was Stephen. His servant stayed with him in his bedroom at night, guarding him. And after the execution of Clement, Stephen and Clement's wife, Domitilla, conspired and ended up stabbing Domitian to death in his bedroom. I guess that Domitilla was a little bit on the vengeance side of vengeance, but Stephen actually did the hatchet job. Don't they look happy though here? I don't think they're ever happy as a family. All right, I've got one more thing to do and then I'm done. Stop sharing. Here's why I think that these heads are in this order. Okay. Hazon, or Revelation 17:11. As for the beast that was and is not, it is an eighth, but it belongs to the seventh, or the seventh, and it goes to perdition. Okay, the perdition thing was an indication that he was assassinated, but that he belongs to the seventh. And yet, he was as the beast that was and is not. That has the head of Nero on it. Here's wisdom concerning this guy. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. We identified Nero's name in having that, but let's look at something with Domitian and the number 8. Everyone knows that the mark of the beast is 666 or 616. We've already made that clear what that stands for. But Domitianus is an 8, an ancient number often used through a trick, through a mystery, through a riddle to identify a particular type of person. And I'm going to give you wisdom. I'm not going to tell you how, I'll tell you how to run this riddle, but you can do the riddle. Give me the answer the fourth time. Next time. Take 8 and you add all the numbers from 1 to 8. 1 plus 2 plus 3, etc., through 8. Then, with that sum, you add all the numbers in that sum. 1 plus 2 plus 3, up to the number you got before. I'll give you a hint, it's over 50. And then, what is that equivalent to? Did you write that down? I'm going to put it in the chat. Chat. Gorbachev. Remember, Gorbachev had a map of Cambodia on his head. Go on. Try it. What's your question? No questions? All right. Well, I got through my notes tonight. I told you to just interrupt here. Okay. Well, thank you for being here and being a part of this. If you can, during the week, send me a message. Let me know what this comes up with. I'll do the same. I've already done this 100 times. And I forgot for a long time, but this is supposedly almost like a Jewish alchemist formula that was used often in Jewish esoteric literature. So somebody in the know would, if it said 8, you said, yeah, I know a number trick about that. But maybe you could guess what that adds up to. And if not, well, we're both in trouble. Thank you for being here. Probably be here Thursday again. Yahweh be with you. I pray for you. I love you. Good night.